Good evening and welcome to the Writers Here and Now reading series. This is the final reading of the semester, the faculty alumni reading. Tonight we have the great pleasure of welcoming back Katy Didden and Shara Lessley and hearing them read with Josh Weiner. I'd like to take a moment on behalf of the MFA program in creative writing and the Jimenez Porter Writers House to gratefully acknowledge the sponsors who make this series possible, including the College of Arts and Humanities, the Department of English, the Center for Literary and Comparative Studies, the University Book Center, the Pepsi Fund for Campus Enhancements, the Office of Undergraduate Studies, and Professor of Electrical Engineering Robert Newcomb. Please take this moment to turn off your cell phones completely. No texting, no beeping, no buzzing. Director of Creative Writing Stanley Plumley will introduce Katy and Shara, and Professor Elizabeth Arnold will introduce Josh Weiner. Thank you.
We are very, very happy to welcome Katy Didden and Shara Lessley, two former MFA poetry graduates from here at Maryland, to the stage tonight. In my doddering old age, I think of Katy and Shara as recent students, perhaps from a couple of years ago, when in fact I believe it's been no fewer than 10 years since they left us. Indeed, it must be at least 10 years because of all that each of them has accomplished, including a remarkable first collection of poems. Katy Didden's poems and reviews have appeared in such places as the Kenyon Review, the Missouri Review, Smartish Pace, and the Best New Poets Anthology. She holds degrees from Washington University, the University of Maryland, and the University of Missouri. She has recently completed a postdoctoral fellowship at St. Louis University and is currently a Hodder Fellow at Princeton University. Shara Lessley's list of writing awards includes the Wallace Stegner Fellowship from Stanford University, Diane Middlebrook Poetry Fellowship from the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, the Olive O'Connor Fellowship from Colgate University, and the Discovery the Nation Prize, one of 4 national prizes given annually. She holds degrees in dance and English from the University of California at Irvine and her MFA from here. She is presently the 2014 Marywood Fellow at Washington College. Katy Didden's The Glaciers Wake won the 2013 Lena Miles Todd Prize and has just appeared from Pleiades Press. It is a fully felt book of poems built by a wonderful gift for simile and analogy and a kind of science eye insight into the angular moments that define us. Nowhere are these skills and perceptions better summarized than in her book's title poem, where the poet's losses, both emotional and mortal, are enacted through the figure of glacial ice, in which the speaker's mind climbs down to where the cold erases the weathered structure and where ice eclipses the too wide sky, and where the speaker, trapped, waits in a cell of air for the year to melt each brittle inch into what's green, the growing sea, the wind-scummed water mirrored with clouds, that she reads as words from my loved dead. By my own heat, she says, I melted room to hold my body. I made a god of birds out of the man. Our second reader, Shara Lessley, is the author of Two-Headed Nightingale, published by the Western Michigan University Press. It is a collection of mastered form and patient arrivals. It is no accident that Shara has a degree in dance and once worked for the Kiroff School of Ballet here in Washington. The dance in her poems thrives on balance and equipoise, on completing arcs and circles, and on its ability to stay within itself without overreaching in order to release its energy. Yet for all her artfulness, Leslie's poems are never precious. They're not even beautiful, or else they're exactly beautiful. The title poem, Two-Headed Nightingale, reenacts the literal song and dance of the famous 19th century McCoy sisters, who were not only born into slavery, but were from birth attached at the spine. Their further slavery was the showmanship required of them on stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And I want to say what a joy it is to be back here at Maryland and walking around the campus and having all these memories come back from my time here. I just am filled with gratitude for my professors here. And I'm thinking back, after I left Maryland, I've taught in several different creative writing programs, or I've been a student in other programs. And the more that I see, the more I realize how lucky we are here. And I just continue to use everything I've learned and build on that as I've moved forward. So I'm very thankful to be invited here. And it's such a delight to be reading with Shara, who started the MFA program the same year that I did. And we've continued to be good friends, and I am so inspired by her and her poetry. So it's just terrific to be here tonight. So I'm going to read poems from the Glaciers Wake for a few poems from the book, and then I'll read some new poems after that. Okay. And I'll start with the title poem, which Stan so kindly referred to in the intro. So. The Glaciers Wake. Toothed snout, blue eye, white-tongued as icy Jove on a god-slow lay, as alive as how I thought my grief should be, a heaving ice field, an evaporating history, onto which, inside the crags of which, I liked my mind to climb. Down where the cold erases the weather's structure, where ice eclipses the too wide sky, I waited in a cell of air for the year to melt each brittle inch into what's green. The growing sea, the wind-scummed water mirror, with clouds I read as words from my loved dead. By my own heat I melted room to hold my body. I made a god of birds out of the man. This next one is sort of my greatest hit. It was published in Poetry Magazine, and I used to get all these random fan letters, and I realized that most of them were from middle-aged men, and now you can see when I read it why they might be sending me random messages. Here it is. It's called Embrace Them All, Parc Georges Brassens, Paris. Most afternoons, I'd run laps through Parc Brassens, where grows the second smallest vineyard I have ever seen, and where those silver pruned-back stalks looked blunt, strung out on wires, and mostly dead all winter. That was how I saw them. That's all I expected. Even in the cold, I'd see a guy my age there once a week, playing his guitar. He'd sit next to the bench where I'd be stretching. He rarely spoke, just to ask if I'd like a song, until the week before I left for good. I was sitting at the top of a hill about 100 feet away from where, if you stand tiptoe, you can see the Eiffel Tower. He sat too close to me. We spoke of many things. Then he suggested we go at it right there, on the ground, under the sun. This is how one lives who knows that she will die, rolling in the arms of anyone she can, rolling in the arms of a musician, aware that no one cares much what we do in little knolls behind reedy forsythia, in the middle of a Tuesday, in the middle of living. And I would know now how he felt, and the ground against me, and whether he was rough or sweet, and what is possible would widen every hour. Oh, but me, I thought I was immortal. And this next poem I was talking to Don about before the reading, and it's kind of a strange poem in the book, and it came out of I was reading a number of different books, and they all kind of joined together in this poem. I had attended a lecture by a woman named Sister Deanna Ortiz who had survived torture, and one of the things that happened to her as a result was that she forgot about, she had amnesia of her entire life before the torture happened. She couldn't remember her childhood. So I was reading that, I went to that lecture, and I was also reading Elaine Scarry's The Body in Pain, which is a meditation on torture. And then I was also reading Gertrude Stein. So that was kind of the stew out of which this poem arrived. It's called The Soldier on Routine. We are living with the young Christ in the green zone. Even we who are not he suffer hands tugging our hems, though our minds select the bodies we see. Young Christ is dual, but what of him is like us, taken in by order, the roof and walls, inside which we sleep, boot scuffs and dust, the white floors wiped clean. He does not eat some days, and so too we choose and can. It's not that this isn't hell, though the light switch lights long into the night. If we could name the mind frame sight, the body wall, a solid feature with a latch through which we exit armored to disorder, that is, the original being or its pre-becoming. Out there the zone is we, the tank a brutal country singing. Young Christ is dual, though even the God he is won't interfere. The cells beneath the surface of the scene, he says, he senses like his own skin still unflayed. That scrim in him, keeping him human, among us crimping barbed wires over buildings. Our hands bleed, but then we've made a thing and can put it from us. If only they'd stay far from us, or else we infiltrate a mind, walking in on the backs of the uttered word, a word shook loose through the terrifying bodies, where every pore's unbarriered. A hand nailed to a house, the pierced room a cage, the wound a seam we fill with seed. Body in which we live unsafe. And then he breaks through to two at once, and this by violence. We who are not he cannot contain it. Schism of many-chambered brain, schism of time, schism of no into infinite pain, amnesia of the known, of where we were before, and if we're where was Eden, where's the latch? Where are leaves to cover all these bodies? We watch our hands in motion, widening the wound, and it's there we enter, as though we could pass through to the princeless, incinerated kingdom. So throughout this book, I have a bunch of persona poems. I am speaking in the voice of different creatures and features. So I have poems in the voice of a glacier and a sycamore and a wasp. So I'm going to read a couple of those. This one is in the voice of the glacier. It's called The Glacier on Lack of Sleep. When day comes, the light's too bright. A yawn forms behind the spires of your eyes. Your jaw cracks, splits a crevasse. Little parts of you collapse. If you were older or cared less about being seen, you would lie down in public. And this is the sycamore. Asymmetry, the sycamore on balance. A symmetry of forces, yes, but not of shape. The roots, a mess of curves. Like slow snakes, they incorporate rocks. With full weight pressing down, my trunk arrows skywards. For humans, centering's awkward. You lack longevity, can't fight gravity, grow heavy. What wayward cantilevering keeps you calm? When sorrow settles, blights your limbs, what dark contortions fix you to the source? Contrition, the light-aimed psalm. Okay, I'm going to move on to some of the newer poems. I've been writing in a iambic meter, which is I haven't done often, and so it's been an interesting experiment. And so you'll hear that in the titles that I'm about to read. So this first one is called Watching Redbuds Bloom Under Threatless Skies, Tower Grove Park, St. Louis. To run the route again, revised by wholly reattempting. Fast or slow, pain in the knee or not, for several weeks I crossed paths with a stranger, walking his enormous hound. We moved like democratic moons in counter orbits, waving. Other days I'd see a man who must have been 6'3", lanky and handsome, thin but strong and sprinting, missing an arm. I kept my gaze on his face, nodding hello, thinking of Whitman's Vigils by the Wounded, weighing in my mind the pacifist's belief that if you put your body in the line of fire, someone will dare not to shoot it. In the space I expected to see his arm, I saw thousands of bodies swaddled in winding sheets, laid out on the ground like a fabricated river through a desert I have only seen on film, my brain transposing damaged Californias where unnamed bones name borders, where only wild-haired activists sniff the ground, tracing the history of terror. When Henry Shaw granted land for Tower Grove, he just lived through the Civil War. Under the asphalt, the circling trails spell out old griefs and faith in gathering, and a forward-looking nation naming itself with bandstands, bronze statues, red and white striped pavilions, lily ponds, tennis courts, ponies and chickens, and wide fields gently sloping on which you could not see a single cannon. Right now, one man teaches another to build bombs, to dress wounds, to cower under rocks and shoot what moves, and the one-armed soldier runs beneath the trees at the speed of joy. If I'm the soldier, the civilian, and the gun, if I'm the single flash of outrage soon forgotten, let me still praise the too accommodating body, how it perseveres, running in futile circles like a champ, though the replay never alters how wars end, or that they'll begin again. And this next one is called, right now, On Resisting Z's, On Resisting Sleep. Paul Shaw breeds insomniac flies to study the necessity of sleep. He tilts glass tubes at unstable angles and watches wide-eyed as haywire flies fail alighting inside them. Paul celebrated tenure in October and threw a party on his deck and lit the heat lamps and tapped the keg, and all the Shaws flew in from the west. And though at first she hadn't wanted to go with me, the instant my mother met the Shaws, she felt she'd found her long-lost kin, like distant cousins from before the famine. All the Shaws are thin, except for Matt, whose years playing pro football overseas lets him walk among mere mortals like a god. It fell to him to saber open bottles of champagne, sending corks flying over the fence into the neighbor's yard, since the neighbor moved and his house was empty, and since he'd left a second-story window open for pigeons and for our imaginations, which tend to think of houses as our psyches, as layers of identity one must unveil, descending level by level down to the cellar, where the cellar of, I have a typo, of archetypes. But Paul distills the archetypal further, down to the bio-original soup. He believes that sleep was the primordial state, that we slept our way into sentience. And I don't know what it says about me, but I do not wonder what it was that caused whatever was like an eye to open, whatever was like an ear to listen outside slumber to the world beyond itself. I know that it was grief, even if infinitesimal, when proto-life drifted in solution over a patch of sea just 1 degree cooler than the rest, an effect like free fall pulling us all in the wake of understanding we are mortal, spurring us to develop fins, then limbs, to specialize and specialize, until we sit like scholars on a pinnacle who contemplate in the cold air the miracle that everything's connected, so that the air between what's here and what comes after thins, as it seemed to do at Paul's house when we fell into a place we'd never been and felt at home. It was as if, in that keyhole of conviviality the deck reflected back to heaven, we could attract our Father's spirits back to us, that they might lean down out of the ether to look on us again, though how they looked would have to be imagined, since the annoying flies that stowed away under Paul's lapels had come alive in the late October light, weaving spells in cloud-like hatches over our heads, soaring the gaps between here and eternity with a spastic comedy, like kaleidoscopes distracting us from sadness, like a wild circadian disco. Thank you very much.
As a poet, I think I spend most of my days failing language, and it's only really that I feel like language fails me when I try to express gratitude. And I don't think I can fully do that to really express how grateful I am to the faculty here, who really, Liz and Josh, Michael and Stan, continue to have such a profound influence even after a decade. And also to Katy and the friends that I made here, who also have been so supportive and encouraging all these years. So thank you so much for having me back. I'm going to read one poem that I couldn't not read from Two-Headed Nightingale and then move forward. But this poem is located in Maryland, and so I thought it was appropriate. The Peninsula. And when autumn finally arrived, I drove to the southernmost point of Maryland, strip of land like an outstretched arm, holding a lighthouse in its palm, tower's base weathered by surge, half ocean, half Potomac. And when sundown came and the tourists had gone, I walked the jetty, as we too had walked, plodding from rock to rock, until we reached the crest, then rested, our bodies towering over granite. From boat or car, we could have been any two people watching the bay merge with something greater, blue-brown river joining the sea, orange canker festering in the leaves and brush behind us. And when your words returned, I found a few yards from shore the place soldiers built a hospital to house the rebel wounded. Pointing to a stack of planks, you traced the moat and mapped the perimeter, though no sane man would swim to war, but waited out for his body to heal or the tide to turn, so he too might return home, worn as a field torn open by rain, which is really the earth being broken, or the sound we make, breaking each other in silence, something turning the air, a coldness neither can explain, but senses, massing gradually toward us. So from Maryland, many miles overseas, I spent the last 3 years living in the Middle East. And my second book of poems takes root in Amman, Jordan. When you announce to friends and family that you're moving to the Middle East, you receive a number of reactions and a lot of advice. And some of that advice comes from people who have never even left the city or their home state. I was desperate for information and discovered when I arrived in Amman that most of the advice that I received really told me more about the person who had given it to me rather than the actual place itself. This is advice from the predecessor's wife, and I'll have to pause a couple of times in the poem to keep from revealing some names, so you'll hear me stop for a moment. Advice from the predecessor's wife. Learn Arabic. Your husband won't have time. At Carrefour Express, aisle 1 is the tax-free line. For poultry, go to Swafia, the Palestinian chicken man shop.
Pig, on the other hand, is impossible to find. Frozen pork sometimes turns up at the co-op. Basha, wife, is pregnant with twins. Expect to host a spa date or two for his mistress. Never make eye contact with local men. Read Married to a Bedouin, The Expert Expat's Guide. Skip Queen Noor's book. She's from the Midwest. During Ramadan, crumbs breakfast is the best. Everything else is closed. Never ride in the front of a taxi with an Arab. If you're near the embassy, avoid hailing a cab. Security says we're sitting ducks. Help in Amman runs cheap. Hire a driver, a maid, a cook. Mansef is made with lamb or goat and stewed in a hearty chamid. When dining with royalty, keep conversation neutral. At private parties, be prepared to be the only woman in the room. Save the staff. Look the part, but don't show cleavage. Lipstick is fine. Laugh hard, but not too hard, at Colonel Dick jokes. Know how to properly cut and light a cigar. When talk turns to politics, smile and nod, then say something obscure in Arabic. Your husband will give you the cue. The Georges will think it's cute. Never ask a woman how long her hair is under the hijab. Don't call anyone but your husband Habibi. Explore the souks, steer clear of the mosques. All Arabs hate dogs. Walk yours after dark. Comb your yard for poison and traps. Close your drapes. Western women are common victims of peeping toms. When moving among crowds, expect children and strangers to stop to stroke your hair. Always carry your passport. The number one reason a man's relieved from his post, his wife's unhappy. Avoid this from the get-go. Get a hobby. Play tennis, take a class, find a job. The field's leveled for spouses. Here, education and experience equal nada. The work week runs Sunday to Thursday. Your husband will clock in Saturdays, Fridays too. Pack at least 4 ball gowns. Stock up on shirts with sleeves. Gunfire means graduation or congratulations, a wedding's just taken place. Don't be disturbed by the armed guards outside your apartment. Their assault rifles don't have bullets, rumor has it. Little America runs perpendicular to Ring 6, aka Cholesterol Circle. Popeyes, Burger King, Hardee's, you'll find everything you need. McDonald's Playland spans 3 upstairs levels. Ship a year's worth of ketchup, mayonnaise. Blondes are often mistaken for hookers. Consider dyeing your hair. By September or October, you'll learn to tune out the call to prayer. I was a blonde the entire time I was there and just dyed my hair dark when I got back. I don't know what that says about me. Rebellious. During the 3 years in Amman, I tried desperately to learn Arabic, and after 3 years of intense study, it's still pitiful. But it was a good time trying. So this is called In Arabic. In Arabic, there's no to be, no passivity. Is always implied. Nor does miss exist in the local dialect, only the half block between her father's house and husband's. A boy takes as his battle cry his sister's name or his camel's, his gun's imagined refrain, Mabruk, congratulations. There's a word for the little pieces of candy wrapped not in plastic but dried lilac, a phrase for the static of snow crust forming white camellias of ice. In class, I scribbled translation's phonetic equivalent. How to ask, what place is this? Which street? In English, tourist sounds like terrorist. Terrorist, tourist. In Arabic, there are 99 ways to say God. Friday's Al-Juma stems from to gather, as in to gather for noon's holy prayer. What hour is this, my teacher asks, to which I insist, at the market I drank fresh juice. What day is this? Let's take our kids to the pool? She answers questions with questions. You're from where exactly? Why are you here? Study the sounds, she proposes, the characters, valleys, and peaks. Shuba Shufik, what do you see? A corkscrew of scrolls unrolled across the dead at Wujab Mahdi. border. 4 kilometers from Umkais above Galilee's steely sea, we make our retreat along an unpaved route, passing a family sprawled beneath a terebinth. A boy scampers up the tree. His brother fools with a 2-way radio. Along another road, if I saw that, you say, I'd be all nerves. Across some border, already men are counting bodies, taking bets. First a signal, then the code. 3 touch tones and the convoy's done for. It's easier to see parts than the whole, you explain, of sifting the wreckage of machinery and bone. A half-kilometer past, you stop the jeep to let a herdsman pass, horned breeds falling into a kind of rank, long-haired goats coming up behind. A wattled pair stalls near the cave, where, so it's said, Christ might have slept for weeks or days after driving demons into a herd of swine. The restless flock is filing, the weather's fine. There you point towards Golan Heights, stuck in the valley's bed along the Israeli side. See that green-blue minaret? It blasts reggae Thursday nights. They've gutted it into a bar. Which reminds me somehow of that brownstone church-turned-nightclub I stumbled from so many years ago. Drunk, half numb, back to some partially furnished apartment, friend of a friend's I barely knew, where, practically nude, I woke next morning to a roach scuttling up the overturned cup of my bra. Who was it that said in order to sleep, one must feel safe? I stared at the wall's gray, sponge-shaped smudge an hour, maybe 2, trying to piece the previous night together, knowing a headless roach will live a week before it dies of thirst. Now, the gravelly click of the jeep's wheels rambling down the road. 8 months we've lived in the Middle East, have yet to reach the night I dreamed the embassy bombing at Kabul. Half buried, you hold what's left, some fabric scrap, a woman's burning sandal. As an expat, inevitably, you start to get requests for things, for stuff. And these care packages, we shipped back to the States pretty regularly. And I think people want it as proof that you're really over there, that you're not, living in a condo in Florida or something. I don't really know. But I always felt somewhat like I couldn't really accurately deliver what I wanted to in terms of the items that I was sending to sort of convey the life lived. In this poem, you'll hear me use the word dish dash, which is sort of a long formal robe that you see Arab men wear quite often. And the poem also makes me think of Katy because there's a nod to Bishop's The Armadillo with the fire balloons. I'm sure many of you know that poem. It's the first time I saw fire balloons in Jordan. They asked me to send coffee mixed with cardamom, Hebron glass, vases and carafes, wood inlaid with mother of pearl. They ask for bath soaps, mud masks, Dead Sea scrubs and salts, water siphoned from the baptismal site. My father's friend wants a dish dash to parade around in at parties. I ship him a pendant to ward off the evil eye. I box up the shark tank at Le Royale, the latest news from the camps. My cousin wants a picture of me on a camel, a hookah with apple tobacco. I bubble wrap a jar of pickled pomegranate seeds, ignore his request for Bedouin coal. Send instead a minaret, dump trucks snuffing the call to prayer. I send the air at Aaron's tomb, a vial of wind whipped across its peak. This week, much like the last, my mother demands a precise timeline detailing our stateside return. Her neighbor wants proof I'm not giving birth in a cave. I sent both painted ostrich eggs, billboards of the heir apparent. My husband's aunt needs a recipe for kanafa, a rug whose threads surge seafoam and gray. I mail her a mizmaze of taxis unzipping King's Highway, the desert fish's bristling scales. And when they ask what holds us to this region, aren't we growing tired or afraid? I'll parcel the kingdom's shade. I'll round up the fire balloons signaling Ramadan's end as effortlessly they drift across Citadel Hill, where teams of men drag stones to mount the Temple of Hercules, the still-standing palace dome, where tonight A low red moon is pulsing. Dead gold, dead gold, dead gold. The niqab and the jilbab are kinds of coverings that women wear in the Middle East, and dragon's teeth is a kind of small bomblet that you'll hear me reference. This is in Jordan's northernmost province, and it's dedicated to the Middle East's first all-female demining crew. Women go down on their knees, hovering above a map work of metalwork, brushing dust from cluster bombs like ash from flatbread. Delicate metal-filled bomblets glisten, scaring off the crows. In fields where men once braided their hair, a wife trades her niqab for body armor and goggles, sifting the topmost soil from behind her rake. She knows the mines never sleep. She knows better to feel the snakes, scorpions' heat, her brother's pasture where running water dislocates the dragon's teeth, toy-like mines disguising themselves as butterflies and yams. Still shepherds herd their sheep in restricted fields, their daughters more afraid of sniffing dogs than the cross-shaped pressure plates lying in wait. Today begins where yesterday ends. Brushes, detectors, mallets, and stakes, prodding 20 square meters grain by grain, searching for wires attached at the pull switch. And the ragged finch perched on the fence post, does it prophesy something among the fruit trees? A thimble-sized device, perhaps, its firing pin needling a young boy's eyes. Who knows what the ordinary arbor holds? Hundreds of underground cages ready to unloose the claymore birds in air, their blackened gullets canting for the boy's mother, now downed among the silent grasses, as if unclasping a barb from her stocking, or bending down to sweep back the wild herbs clutched at her jilbab's hem. Okay, I have just two more. I have no doubt that many of you were at AWP last year in Boston, and if you saw a woman sort of waddling around pregnant out to here and thought, what the hell is that lady doing here? That was me. I committed to going to AWP well in advance of realizing I would be waddling out to here. And so this poem was written on that occasion, and also I think many of us were sort of running around Boston, and then just a few short weeks later we had the bombing, and it was really eerie to have just been walking on those streets. So this is Vertigo Boston, the Middle East. Snow and snow, a trimester to go, and sleet, a half block to Boylston. I fall hard, crossing the street. Strangers help me to my feet. I'm fine. My ungloved hand, snow and snow, begins to bleed. My hip, my knees. What kind of mother am I? Padding through snow and sleet to read poetry at the public library. I should rest. I should be in bed. My mascara's running, ice silvering the trees. My ears ring snow and snow. Someone calls my name. I grip the podium, hear myself recite some phrase about a bird, thinking, please, please, daughter, move, daughter, kick. Give me something, anything small, cardinal, downed in sleet. Outside, men shovel corners, machine the streets, where in 6 weeks' time, snow and snow, white tufts of smoke will burst, silvering the trees, shaved nails and shards puncturing snow and snow their limbs, their trunks, their spines, as someone else's daughter falls. I'll be giving birth a world away, crossing the finish line, my lower half numb as ice in a high-rise surgical theater, light silvering the trees. They're hovering over her. I feel them tug her free, then snow and snow, an elongated pause, and nothing. Shriek, I think, God damn it, cry, because to cry's a sign. To cry is proof there's life. When I was an MFA student, we were really fortunate to have Shahed Ali come read and talk to us about the ghazal, and I always wanted to try my hand at it. And so this is a loose ghazal. It's not perfect, but this is expat ghazal. Shrek, that ghost bread, haunts the clay ovens of Amman. Double health and strength, Sautain in Amman. Alleys of hollyhocks, lots smoldering trash. Feral cats pick at the urban ash of Amman. Assad raises the suburbs, villagers burn like moths. Jordan's border rains loss on Amman. My eyes are heavy, it's not yet dawn. Minarets are buzzing, Arab spring slumbers on in Amman. Who dyed this fabric? Who spun this silk? Anointing ladies who lunch in Amman. The sun, we sweat like chickens on the spit. Expats shading ourselves in nooks of ruined Amman. O useless cup, O spoon of dust, sun up to sundown, Ramadan in Amman. 5 times called, I seldom pray, but bless the goat bells, donkey carts scattering Arabic song through Amman. Leaves are turning, the king's hand is drawn, another official axed in Amman. Winter erases the pavement, whitens the grove. I trace the crest of my footprint, broken snow in Amman. One day I will pack our things, your fish-shaped key, my olive wood bowl, cut from a desert tree in Amman. But how to carry with me the women unbinding their hair at the Turkish baths, their naked forms walled in by reams of steam in Jabal Amman. How do I bottle the unsweetened scent of our son, born last fall in Amman? Some cities never leave you. The checkered mosque perched like a sunbird, the blue mosaic dome. Backgammon chips clicking, singing home in Amman. Thank you.
Josh Weiner's third book of poems, The Figure of a Man Being Swallowed by a Fish, may be his best, which is saying a lot, considering the excellence of the first two. Always fascinated by received and invented forms and gravitating to full rhyme, even in free verse, Josh's poems have a stately quality, as if their gestures were part of a classical frieze. The new poems move a bit more quickly, even flow, and nowhere more than in the opening long poem of the book, Rock Creek 2. That it is the opening poem changes how a reader hears the shorter, more strictly formal poems that follow. These poems' end rhymes don't slow things down quite as much as they would have, I think, had Rock Creek 2 not come before them. The book works really well as a whole. I like how Josh lets himself be lost a bit in the flow of the language, how he lets things stay open a little bit longer. This seems related to his equating of the word flow with passage, encouraging the feeling that we're moving through a passageway into another dimension almost, another way of seeing what's before us in the material world that even so intimate a part of us as our own bodies belongs to. I don't know that we'll hear Josh read from the long poem tonight, though he just told me that he's going to read a little bit. But if not, though we will, we'll hear its echo, and we will, in the other poems. The long poem's presence in the book reminds me of how the prose section of Robert Lowell's Life Studies works, an experiment in form that led to Lowell's very best poems in that book and beyond. When I think about what's happening with Josh's writing now, I feel like I'm perched on the outer edge of a continental shelf, about to dive into the enormity of the depths. It's a little bit frightening, but mostly exhilarating. Among his many, many awards, Josh has won a fellowship to the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, a Whiting Award, the Rome Prize, an Amy Lowell Traveling Scholarship, and most recently, a Guggenheim Fellowship. Please join me in the warmest welcome for Josh Weiner.
Thanks, Liz. It's great to be up here reading with such brilliant poets. Last night of Hanukkah. So I thought I'd start by reading the first poem in my first book, which is called Psalm. And it's modeled on the Psalms of David. It's not a Psalm of David, it's something I made up. I guess it's a Psalm of Josh. But like the Psalms of David, it addresses God directly, but not happily. Psalm. When I sing to you, I am alone these days and can't believe it, as if the stars, while gazing up at them, just shut off, astonished. I search out the one light, brightest light in the night sky, but find I cannot find it without weaker lights to guide me, like red tail lights on a car up ahead after midnight when I'm sleepy, that illustrate how the highway curves, curving to a hook, and maybe save my life. And it means nothing to me, because nothing has happened, not the faintest glint of drama. Raining gently, the tarmac turns slick, moistened to life with renewed residues. I can sense it with my hands on the wheel, the drops, not too heavy, drumming off-time rhythms on the metal roof, the metal surface like a skin, tense and sweating, and the road empty now. There are so many exits. Where is my family? Both hearth and constellated trail of flicker I have always followed to your word. There, but mastered by fear of dark compulsions and loathing atrocities committed in your name, they hit the dimmer switch and extinguish themselves whenever I sing your praises. Who can blame them? I can't help but blame them. And anyway, they are far from me, farthest when they come to visit. I should be self-reliant, in my armchair like Emerson reading by a single lamp. I should not need them, finding in you, myself, little firebug needing no outlet, my soft light blinking as I oxidize my aimless flight to love, to the good, even my glowing chemistry unnecessary now in the ultimate light of day. But what good would that do me? With you, in you, perhaps others do not matter. But this isn't heaven, and I cannot make a circle all on my own. Photon, luciferin, meteor. As I burn myself to pieces, I only pray, let my sparking tail remain a moment longer than our physics might allow, some indication, however brief, that there continues, amen, a path to follow. So I am going to read some of the long poem, as Liz mentioned. The poem is Rock Creek, and this is the second part. It's like a second poem altogether. There's a first poem called Rock Creek that is in the book, and although I was quite happy with it when I wrote it, and I'm still quite happy with it, I realized at some point that it didn't contain enough of the reality of the creek. So in the poem, in this long poem that opens the book, Rock Creek 2, the creek, which is this tributary, a lot of you know it, runs through Rock Creek Park, starts in Maryland, it's about 75 miles long, runs through the Capitol, empties into the Potomac, and out to the ocean. The creek is an emblem for national history, natural history, prehistory, secret histories, personal histories. And in the poem, my voice fuses at times with the voice of Walt Whitman. It's not the Whitman of the poems, but rather the Whitman of the journals and diaries and letters. Whitman, during the Civil War, came down from New York to look for his brother who had been wounded. And after he found him and after his brother returned to the war, Whitman stayed and became a kind of legendary nurse, nursing both soldiers of the Union and Confederate armies. The poem moves around in time. Time is kind of simultaneous in the poem. And this first part that I'm going to read is something like an overture. It's like the music of the creek. And it goes like this. Cutting a way through stone to see what's there, not how things appear. Earth blood, without style, never at rest. What settles in it, red on the surface ripples, meandering forward, eddying back, swirling turbid, intricate plates of water, from the bottom rising, turning upside down, striking bank before returning to stream center. Original current, indifferent to the play of light. Crystalline, ideal forms, a static lie. Rather, as Leonardo saw, a motion resembling hair. One must take 5 days to place water in a picture, while a splash erupts into corona, its rim breaking into spills of droplets like the secret structure of rainfall. Scalloped edges of water, joining water in common coil, spawning vortices, streamlines detaching as they hit fluorescent storm-swept traffic cones, glowing half-submerged, shedding eddies, rushing faster by tightening gorge, squeezed self-amplifying transmission as one flow drives another motion, altering force, driving that motion, like Coltrane, stretching tight vibrato phrases, incremental shifts of pitch and tone, the place it's going, unknown, excited viscous harmonies continuously born, devoured, cascades of smaller scales, circulating airstreams, the unregarded river of our life, an overflow of meanings with no speech, undirected as prisoners of Guantanamo, flooding cells in protest, each drinking 18 bottles of water in an hour. In the breath, preaches one man, having heard it from his father. The breath moved upon the face of the waters, while another speaks ex-con activist, wry observer at the crossroads, how the system is hustling backwards. So the poem goes lots of places. It goes to the Union Army stationed in the park and visits them in the consciousness of Walt Whitman. It goes to the park more recently where Chandra Ann Levy was murdered. It goes to a parking lot in a giant supermarket. It goes to Walter Reed, where Walt Whitman visits the soldiers who are returning from Gulf War. And it ends like this. Rock Creek is a passage. It is not a law. One follows it before understanding. You follow it like your parents' music, till the good sound is a new good sound, changed into something you make yours. There is a place in the creek where you might step into the same water twice, where the downstreaming vortex opens and makes its way back up along the bank, turning at a concave boulder where turning water wore it away, and that streamline turning and moving downstream, then veers toward the bank and makes its way back up. If the sun's out, it's hard to see. It's clearer when it's cloudy. There's less reflected light. Spring shad hang in the slacks, their launch over the baffles delayed to breathe more before they fire up the ladder of origin to spawn in pools they dreamed of in the tides of larger waters. When you step into the creek, you're still outside it. Therefore, outside of it, you feel the water moving through you. The logic may seem false, but the sudden chill will make you sneeze. And what you find there in the passage as the sun goes down is the shadow of the shagbark lengthening on the water until the longer coursing shadow drinks it up to carry it away, as if it were a kind of rain, like words that continue the silence, undirected by any motive. It mixes with the dust, and on the bodies of animals enters the colder stream. If you go to a resort, you might find a brochure in your hotel that reads, "Things to do while you're here." You might not, but you might. Things to do while you're here. Things to do while you're here. I was at Disney World by myself. How long had I been there? Surrounded, but without companion? The rides did not look fun. When I ran into a Disney character on the street, I felt uneasy. There's Pluto, mute, unnaturally upright and intrepid on his two hind feet, a wide, happy dog smile cut into the snout. From tip of black nose bulb to saucer-sized black pupil looked the length of a torso. Could I make out the sweating human body inside the heavy plush construction? Hardly a costume, the cramping box of the little ease. And if I had a knife, would I wrestle him down and liberate the body from its gainful employment? I wandered aimlessly from Frontierland to Tomorrowland to Liberty Square, eating Disney food and looking for a chair, away from the crowd where I could sit and read the book I was carrying. I found myself again in a busy picnic area. Its dishevelment settled my nerves. I found an open bench, sat down, and opened the book on the long wooden table. Soon, I was lost in a sentence, a cadence. My physical surroundings became a faint background to my book. The world slowed down. I was content, without worry. The sun was making the pages warm and crinkly, old pages. My elbows on the wood were not unpleasantly hot. Even as the wood got hotter, it was not unpleasant, but the brightness was making me dizzy. Something made me look up. Dogs were surrounding me in a circle, 6 of them. With eye contact, the 6 dogs began a low growling, their heads lowered, napes bristling, coarse-haired, scrawny. I could count their ribs. They were baring their teeth, their ulcerated gums. Something was wrong with them. Parts of their bodies had been shaved. Patches of scaly gray skin showed stitches. Had they been subjected to experiments? With a step toward me, the circle was tightening. "Can someone please help me?" These dogs are going to hurt me. I was standing up, speaking out loud. Can someone please help me, please? The sun was blinding in the blue sky. It was burning my neck. No one paid attention. They were all outside the circle of dogs. But here's my friend Jonathan, inside the closing circle. When did he appear? The circle was slowly closing. Had he been there all along? In a calm voice, he was explaining something. His voice had a quiet authority, a softness and firmness I could hear before I made out the words he was saying. The problem is time. The problem is you can't stop it. A subtle shadow passed over his face. The skin was drawn back from his mouth a little. He was slowly but visibly aging as he spoke. Now he looked younger, now older. Age ebbed in his face like tidal water. It's not a special problem. It's a problem for everyone. He was studying the dogs. But you can shape it. He turned from the dogs to the spires of the magic kingdom, its color and clamor. Vanilla and frying oil fragranced the air, mixing with the smell of hot garbage. He turned back to the closing circle of dogs. This is your nightmare, but you can do something with it. And for what seemed like a long time, I chose not to wake up. Here's one that asks a kind of question. What do you do if you step onto the metro and you see a good friend of yours there asleep? Winter commute. Dear friend, asleep, upright in a seat when I boarded the train, goat stepping over your legs outstretched. Why didn't I wake you, but instead watched you sleep, watched over you 2 seats away, but no, merely watched. Still life, face no longer fresh, but a peach, sweet even as skin loosens from flesh, flesh from pit, those little wrinkles you can make with a thumb press kissing the outer orbit of your eyes, the longer lines, charted down crescent cheeks, your jaw relaxed, lips parted, neat, compact woman's body buttoned up in business darks, foggy gray starched contrasts at neckline and cuff. What reprieve here, shuttling underground, before the courted client you must meet is met? You're floating somewhere, where the car's cold rays can't reach, absorbed in other versions, in version of a life. As when we watch children sleep so far from us, we don't dare wake them in the uncontrollable uncontrolled. Are you back there now, in your own deep new episode, without pillow or comforter or parents standing over you at night, but for a few minutes at peace, with stolen rest, hurtling motionless? Forgive me for not sitting down beside you, placing a hand softly on your tailored arm to call you back, when all I could have offered, weak pleasantries, phatic discharging of routines, impositions, variegated surfaces of elected obligations. What does one owe another in common? What comfort, what welcome release, rehearsed in the dark, dark-clad friend, foe, Proserpina or Pluto, shape-shifting roles all play haphazardly in false fundament, decked out in eye-open finery, embroidered so elaborately, It's ripped right off our backs. That afternoon, when my stop came, I left you suspended in your frail respite and haven't seen you since. This is a new one. It's not in the book. I was living in Berlin last year in a neighborhood called Schöneberg near an U-Bahn stop called Nollendorfplatz. And there was a fellow that I saw there every day. I could say he was playing the harmonica, but that wouldn't be quite accurate. The poem starts with a kind of tag back to a great poem by Mina Loy, Der blinde Junge, the blind youth, a figure that she saw after the First War in Munich, a lad who had been wounded and was playing his harmonica. This is called Accompaniment at Nollendorfplatz. Not blind, like Mina Loy's blind youth, blowing out concussive dark upon a mouth organ, but keeps old eyes shut tight, pressing the little radio only he can hear to his mangled badger ear, the what he pumps on his harmonica. Boiling muesli sewage, steam shovel swamp wheeze, backfiring diaphragm cannon, intergalactic cheese chump vomit instigators, loose esophagus, roofless, power line in a puddle, cheeks cramping in revolt, jerking the body, every furious, sour sucking gust, pure tonic, 102 cents worth, pitched straight to the attic. He's killing time and drilling her to the core, Presley hips, looser than a strip bolt, stubbly, shadow-faced Pythagoras. Where'd you get that super bad shirt, buttoned and tucked in so nice? Essential embellishment, destitute of tone row, Stammstrecke elegy for fluorescent-topped whores in succession on Bülowstrasse. Your stiff pants carefully cuffed, ascending, descending, fearsome anti-harmonizer without cup to collect, giving it up for free on the free read. And when you stop and step from the spot of a broken symmetry, your eyes look right into me, and oh, that smile is the crooked crown in the kingdom of a universal minor key. I'm going to end with the title poem to this book, The Figure of a Man Being Swallowed by a Fish. The figure of a man being swallowed by a fish is a small sculpture. It's about this big. It's a fish standing on its tail, and out of its mouth, the torso of a man is rising. It's an actual object that's in the permanent collection at the Baltimore Museum of Art. But nobody knows who made it, or when it was made, or what part of the world it was made in. And the more I looked at it, the less convinced I was that it was the figure of a man being swallowed by a fish. After all, it could have been the figure of a fish spitting up a man. And this continued on and on and on. The figure of a man being swallowed by a fish. The figure of a man being swallowed by a fish is not a man being swallowed by a fish. With eyes like 8-point throwing stars, it's a man being swallowed by a war, a man being taken into the mouth of a woman or being swallowed by his work. It's a man traveling far inside a book, a man being swallowed up in smoke. He swallows the smoke that blends around him like a thought. It's a man being swallowed by a sound. He shapes it so he lives inside a song of a man being swallowed by his kin, his skin, a man being swallowed by the state. Leviathan in 1948. It's a man being swallowed by another man, literally eaten as a pathway to God. It's a man being swallowed by a sight he cannot reach, cannot touch, cannot trace. It's a man who won't recognize his face, who can't fit the parts or find the place. It's a man in triumph over death, who laughs and beats the dust from his clothes, a man tasting dust inside the laugh. It's a man who listens to the clock, a man with nothing to exchange, a rude man, his twin he leaves behind. It's a man who wants to be a bride, a man being swallowed by his fault with something old to show and new to hide. It's a man who tries to haul the rope, a man who's stooping can't provide, a man who can't forget his name. It's a man who doesn't know his worth. It's a man being swallowed by his wrath, his youth, yield, luck, the law, his fear, the fog, his fame. It's a man being swallowed by a coat, his father's coat. He smells of the fit, a man being swallowed by his vows. It's a man softly squeezing for the vein. He never finds it. He's minding the road. It's a man being swallowed by a room, in which he finds a man being swallowed by a fish. It's a man who thinks, what's in a man? Who exits into night at closing time, the figure of a man being swallowed by a fish.